So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez showing up at the Munich Security Conference. I mean, that was a move that got a whole lot of people talking. You might have been wondering yourself, what was really going on there? Well, we're about to unpack a pretty sharp critique from conservative commentator Victor Davis Hanson. He thinks he has it all figured out.
And really, this is the big question Hanson tries to answer. He argues her being there was no accident, no fluke at all. Nope. He says it was a very calculated step in a super ambitious plan. So, what was that plan? And maybe even more interesting, why does Hanson believe it failed spectacularly?
Okay, so we're going to break down Hanson's argument piece by piece. Just to be clear, our goal here is just to understand his perspective, exactly as he laid it out. We're not taking sides, just exploring the critique. All right, let's get into it. So, Hanson kicks off his analysis, not with the conference itself, but with what he sees as AOC's long-term political goals. He basically argues that her trip to Munich wasn't really about security policy. No, for him, it was all about building up her resume for something much, much bigger. Hanson lays out what he thinks is a three-step master plan. Okay, step 1, challenge Chuck Schumer for his Senate seat. Step 2, use that Senate seat as a launch pad for a presidential run. And step 3, that's where Munich fits in. The idea, according to Hanson, was to fly over to Europe, bash Donald Trump on the world stage, and come back as this celebrated anti-Trump hero.
But, and this is a big but, Hanson argues this whole strategy hit a major snag. He calls it a twofold problem. He basically thinks the entire effort was just built on some really critical miscalculations, which he boils down to two main failures.
So here they are, the two pillars of his argument. First, he says there was a huge gap in her foreign policy knowledge, just a total lack of it. And second, he claims she totally misread her European audience. Okay, let's dig into that first one, the knowledge gap.
All right, so the crucial point for Hanson here is that AOC just hadn't done her homework. That's the bottom line. He claims she doesn't have that deep knowledge of history and global politics you need to be on a stage like that. And in his opinion, boy, did it show.
And to really drive this point home, Hanson doesn't just say she was unprepared. He actually does a little imitation of how she supposedly answered a question about Taiwan. He uses this as his prime example of what he calls verbal stalling, arguing that, there was just no real substance there.
You see, for Hanson, that one moment basically summed up the entire trip. His conclusion is that her background as a domestic activist, while effective at home, just did not prepare her for the tricky world of geopolitics. And the result? An appearance that he says completely boomeranged.
Okay, so that brings us to the second and honestly much more complicated part of Hanson's critique. This is his big theory that AOC just fundamentally misunderstood the European political mindset, especially when it comes to Donald Trump. Hanson builds his whole argument around this idea he calls the European duality. It's like this. He says you have the boilerplate stuff, that's the official public criticism of Trump's style, his tweets, all that. But then he argues there's this secret subtext bubbling right underneath, a private, unspoken belief that, hey, maybe Trump was actually right about a lot of things.
And this idea of a duality is absolutely key to his whole argument. So publicly, as Hanson points out, you'd hear European leaders talk about how worried they were about Trump's America First attitude. But privately, Hanson claims they were actually admiring the results and secretly cheering on his tough stances, because at the end of the day, it helped their security.
And he gets super specific about this. Hanson claims that deep down, European leaders were actually happy that Trump called them out on defense spending. They were happy he was building up the U.S. military, confronting China, and getting tough on Iran. The thinking goes, they might not have liked how he said it, but they sure liked the results.
Okay, so let's tie these two threads together. You've got what Hanson calls AOC's major knowledge gap on one side, and on the other, you have this really complex, almost two-faced European view of Trump. For Hanson, you put those two things together, and what you get is a recipe for total failure.
See, because he thinks she didn't get that secret subtext, her whole message, which was aimed at the public, boilerplate criticism of Trump, just completely fell flat with the real power brokers in the room. In his view, they just weren't the big anti-Trump allies she thought they'd be.
And here's how Hanson basically sums it all up. He's arguing her appeal was really narrow, only hitting the far-left fringes. Why? Because she just didn't get that the very establishment leaders she was trying to win over were secretly benefiting from the exact policies she was there to attack.
But wait, Hanson doesn't just stop with AOC. To really hammer his point home, he brings up another big-name American who was at the same conference, Hillary Clinton. He argues she made the exact same mistake. So Hanson tells this story about how he says Clinton went up to a Czech diplomat, probably expecting some Trump-bashing solidarity. But instead, the diplomat's answer was apparently much more cautious, more nuanced. And for Hanson, that's Exhibit B of that hidden subtext in action.
And then Hanson offers an extremely unfiltered and pretty harsh personal take on Clinton, comparing her to a mythological harpy, and not in a good way. We're including this quote just so you can get the full, unvarnished flavor of his commentary from the source.
But let's bring it back to the main argument. For Hanson, both AOC and Clinton are just examples of the same big idea. He believes they represent a kind of American politician who just listens to what's said publicly and totally misses all the unspoken, self-interested deal-making that's really going on under the surface. So why walk through all of this? What's the point? Well, understanding Hanson's critique really gives you a clear window into a particular conservative viewpoint. It's a perspective that basically sees modern progressive foreign policy as naive, maybe a little performative, and just out of touch with the cold, hard realities of how global power actually works. And all of this leaves us with a final, much bigger question to chew on, something that comes directly out of Hanson's analysis. At the end of the day, in the world of international politics, what's more powerful? Is it what leaders say out loud at the podium, or is it that unspoken subtext that's quietly guiding everything they do behind closed doors?